Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th Tezos Town Hall. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eoin McGinley, and I'm the head of PR at Trilitech. And today we're going to dive into a really interesting conversation and a fascinating development in asset tokenization. We're going to be discussing the launch of Uranium.io, the world's first and only online platform for trading uranium. So we've got a great panel with us today. But before we jump into introductions, we're just going to take a quick look at what's happened since Uranium.io launched. So launching in December last year, the platform's already garnered significant interest from both the Web3 space and also energy sector and institutional investors alike. We've seen a lot of discussions about how the platform works, its accessibility, and its role in driving access to this really fascinating asset that is powering the AI revolution. So let's jump into it a little bit more. We're going to explore the vision behind the product and the platform, the challenges faced in bringing something like this to market in the first place, and some of the innovations and the technology driving it, as well as looking a little bit at what the future holds for Uranium.io. So without further ado, let's meet our panelists. I think we'll kick things off with Arthur Breitman, the co-founder of Tezos. Thank you for joining us, Arthur.
Hey, thanks for organizing this.
Brilliant. And we've also got Ben Elvidge with us today. So Ben is the head of commercial applications at Trilitech. Hey, Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eoin. Delighted to be here, of course.
Brilliant to have you. And lastly, we've got a great guest speaker on today's town hall as well, and that is Crispin Clarke. He's the founder of DLT Advisory and an expert in the uranium sector. Thank you for joining us, Crispin.
Thank you for the invite, Eoin.
Brilliant. Well, fantastic. I think it's a really great panel and hopefully a really interesting conversation to come for our viewers today. So I think we'll kick things off a little bit with looking at, the vision behind Uranium.io, how it sort of came about. And I think, Arthur, you're probably the natural person to kind of speak to that. So we might kick things off with a couple of questions for you, if that sounds good. I think first and foremost, let's just jump into why uranium? What gave you the idea to tokenize uranium of all things?
Well, there's a couple of things. I was looking for the ideal asset to tokenize on a blockchain, and I think uranium ticks a lot of boxes. One is that it's a big asset, right? And most people have heard of uranium. It's very important to the economy. It's a big commodity, so it's a big thing. And I think that's very important if you want to drive interest, if you want to drive liquidity. It is not a niche asset. Number one. Number two, it trades like a niche asset in the sense of there's not a very liquid market for it. The minimum sizes are very large, even though there's clearly a lot of interest in the asset. And three, there's an impedance match with the type of audience you see on blockchains. If you look at cryptocurrencies, in some sense, they are technology. A lot of them, rather than being currencies, are kind of like technologically flavored commodities. And you can say the same thing with uranium, which is technologically favored commodities. The first people I saw in traditional finance taking interest in the cryptocurrency sector were people from the commodity space, which makes sense because I think if you come from the equity space and you look at this and you say, where are the cash flows? It's a lot more understandable with a commodity mindset. And so given the fact that there was this alignment between the type of audience you have on a blockchain and the type of people that might be interested in uranium as a commodity, the fact that it was a big asset, but where market infrastructure was lacking, I think there was a triple opportunity there.
Absolutely. No, that's fascinating. And I think I really like your point about there being an impedance mismatch and match here between uranium and the target audience. But previously, in maybe other waves of tokenization, there's been a bit of a mismatch, I think, at times. Do you want to delve into that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so I think people have looked to the different things when they have done tokenization. A big aspect is lowering cost, and it's true, it does achieve that. So some people who do private issuance, private equity issuance, this type of thing, they do find that it's slightly cheaper for the issuer to use a blockchain, which is great. But by itself, it's not sufficient oftentimes to just cross the threshold. It's nice, but you would want something much more compelling. And a lot of people looked at blockchains as distribution channels. They figured that, look, there's a lot of people with lots of money on these blockchains, and they will want to diversify, and I should give them other assets to diversify into. And as a result, I get basically a distribution channel to a new class of investors. where I think that in pan is that there was not necessarily, I think that a lot of the assets being tokenized did not really match the interest of the type of people who had made money on blockchains, and I think that was a big miss. The second thing is there was a focus on tokenizing a lot of very long tail assets, very small and illiquid. And so if your goal is to bring a lot of people and bring a lot of liquidity, it's not a great strategy because you're going to fragment things. So, you might bring a little pocket of investor here, a little pocket of investor there, as opposed to bringing like one big asset that can drive a lot of adoption.
Brilliant. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And thanks. We've got a good run through of the platform itself there for viewers as well. It's just in the background. I think, Arthur, before we move the conversation on, we have to talk about the AI of it all. Okay, like can you talk a little bit about the role of uranium in powering that next boom of AI development?
Sure. So what made me excited about uranium, I would say before what's been happening in AI is in general, like you've had a bit of a change in attitude toward nuclear power. And a lot of the anti-nuclear sentiment harks back to nuclear accidents like Chernobyl, and also the peace movement in the 60s and 70s. So that generation has moved on, and a lot of concerns are now more around carbon impact, global warming. And if you look at the numbers, in the polls in terms of attitudes to nuclear power, you can see they're going to have a political change. And oftentimes, you look at opinion polls, you look at policy change, and as soon as the opinion poll goes over 51%, you see the politician just change opinion on the matter. And it's been, it's been the case for a while that there has been among populations, specifically in the US, political will to go back to nuclear power, including in particular, if you look at Democrat voters around like younger Democrat voters versus older Democrat voter, you see a clear difference in terms of attitude toward nuclear power. So that was, I think, the first unlock, was that it's a very abundant source of energy. It's very, very attractive, but there was political pressure against it. That's going away. What's going to be the transition? And of course, number two, is that there's now an extremely large amount of demand for AI, which is like forecasted to grow. Where it's different is that we're kind of used to zero marginal cost product in a digital world. So, for example, you go on Facebook, and the marginal cost for Facebook to add another user to their platform is extremely small, right? They need a little bit of server space, and in aggregate, when you're serving billions of users, yeah, it's a pretty penny, but the marginal user doesn't really cost you that much. That is not the case for AI, and that's why all these AI services are charging you like $20, $30 a month. Like inference is expensive, and it's expensive not just because of the hardware, but directly because of the energy cost. So there's a tremendous demand for energy that's going to come from inference. It's going to come from training, and we've seen Microsoft reopening Stream Island. Stream Island is reopening, and Microsoft is doing something with nuclear. I'm not sure if there's two others. I think they are. Amazon building next to nuclear power plants, and all the tech giants who are big in AI at the moment, indicating their intention of drawing a lot of nuclear power. So yeah. It's it definitely accelerated what I think was a bit of a generational comeback for nuclear power.
Definitely. It feels like there's a bit of a wave coming, and even Oracle talking about building modular reactors and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely a new moment for the industry at large. I think on that note, maybe Crispin, as an observer of this industry and an expert in it, it would be wonderful to get your take on, the kind of shift that we're seeing that Arthur has touched on, and also how platforms like uranium.io can then disrupt how this commodity is invested in.
Yeah, just sure. Just carrying on the AI theme, if I can, Eoin, for a minute, because very interesting comments. I think there's two big factors there. As Arthur pointed out, like the energy load of AI data centers is significantly higher than like a Google data center. I think we all know that and kind of understand that. Two big factors that impact the nuclear industry. Number one is for power utilities. So they're running a nuclear power plant to provide power. Typically, they don't have forward sales agreements for electricity. So what's happening now is the big hyperscalers, big tech, are actually buying power ahead of time. They're saying, okay, we'll buy this capacity from you in 5 years, in 8 years' time. That's a big change. So that allows the energy providers to finance the restart or building of nuclear power plants. So that's kind of that's never happened before. Like traditionally, like those utility providers have to kind of self-finance, or they get government finance to provide power. That's number one. Number two is the investment that big tech are making in nuclear power generation capability. So I think maybe, if you read about SMR technology and how Kairos Power in Google, and so that's new. So it kind of, one of the big impediments of the nuclear industry has been the investment footprint ahead of time to build out capacity. So, but that's really just an engineering problem that can be solved with finance. So that's what big tech are doing. So yeah, those are the two kind of big impacts that I see on the nuclear power side with regards to AI. So for sure, yeah, they will be using a lot of power and a lot of baseload power, which is important for data centers in the future. But those two kind of financing factors are very important to understand as well.
Super interesting.
So just kind of going back to the question on like the disruption of the industry, just a little bit of background. Like there's two markets in uranium. There's a spot market and there's a term market. That's how uranium is traditionally traded, bought or sold. The spot market is anything delivers up to a year, and then the term market is after a year. Those are the two markets. So it's an OTC market. There's bilateral agreements that are put in place in both those markets. So between buyers and sellers, they're negotiating a contract that they'll DocuSign between them, and they'll agree a price. And typically the settlement time is like 5 to 7 days for physical settlement. And for financial settlement, it can be up to 2 to 3 weeks. So this idea of a marketplace like Uranium.io coming in and providing this capability to provide instant settlement, instant change of ownership is just completely revolutionary in the industry.
Brilliant, and very, very true to the kind of early ethos of the blockchain space, is right about eliminating barriers to access to these assets that may not previously have been available. So there's obviously there's a retail play, but there's also an institutional play as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So there are ways you can invest in the nuclear industry. So you can invest in uranium mining companies. You can invest in utilities. You can invest in the spot commodity. In the spot commodity, uranium, or U3O8 as we call it, there's no way, apart from if you invest like $4 million plus and have your own storage account, to invest in the spot commodity. So that's how we're revolutionizing that, using Uranium.io to offer instant global access to the spot commodity, which is it's groundbreaking.
Yeah, and most people probably not going to find $4 million down the side of the sofa anytime soon. So that's
not
that's
me.
A big one.
No.
And Ben, from your perspective, then, I mean, like you're coming at this from both the retail side, but also the kind of enabling maybe smaller boutique and institutional investors access to this interesting market as well. Do you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So again, I think Crispin's alluded to a couple of the different perspectives there, that when one thinks about, if you're a small family office or a smaller institution, or even a larger institution just looking to make a small allocation, you think about making an investment and you think about, okay, so how much capital do I need to put in? What's my risk management process? How do I get out? What's the liquidity of getting out? And what's the operational burden of being able to do this, right? So having a converter account, going through all of that KYC, KYB, other analysis and checks that you would hope one of the 3 converters globally does, right? We all want that to happen. And so when you start to look at that, you're like, well, this is a fantastic asset to invest in terms of the spot commodity. It's done over 150% return in the 5 years until the end of February cumulatively. So great from that perspective. So a lot of institutions and smaller family offices probably want to make uncorrelated investments like that, but actually being able to one, kind of deal with the operational burdens, 2, the minimum capital sizes, and then 3, manage the liquidity accordingly. All of those things have been a challenge until we launched Uranium.io, right? Whereas now there's no minimum ticket size. The liquidity is there. The secondary market is there if you want to exit or trim a position. And actually, we're taking care through partners, like Curzon, who facilitated intros to Cameco, like Archax in the background, who's FCA regulated. We've taken a lot of that operational burden away. So actually, if you're looking at this and thinking this is something that I wanted to get invested into, but either couldn't get access to the spot commodity, don't really want to invest in the ETF because I actually want more of a pure exposure rather than, Sprott is trading at 6.5% discount to NAV as at today, which is the largest ETF. As recently as 3 weeks ago, it was trading at 14% discount. That's not a good investment from a sort of asset allocation perspective. So again, it goes beyond just providing access to everyone. That goes without saying as one of the key differentiators, and what we've done from a KYC perspective, etc., enables that. But also, even if you're a smaller institution or any institutional investor, there's benefits to investing in uranium via uranium.io compared to some of the existing capabilities that are out there right now, or going directly into the physical spot market.
Indeed. So you're seeing this perfect moment for solving inefficiencies in those traditional markets as well, and using an innovative technology to do that. So that's really exciting as well. And I would imagine, would I be right in saying, Ben, that there are maybe other like commodities that are sort of similar, like that people either can't access or institutions want into, but the liquidity might not be there. So beyond uranium, in fact, there might be even opportunities for other metals and things in the longer term.
Absolutely think so. I think one of the most powerful things to come out of the product, and from a product perspective, is the blueprint that we've built around this that's enabled the sort of right balance. And we've done quite a lot of work and legal consultation and the like to ensure that we can get that balance of streamlining the onboarding to make it as seamless as possible, alongside meeting all of those regulatory obligations. But absolutely, and I think as we look at the opportunity, we think it's huge into other metals like lithium, like cobalt. Generally, it's sort of that rare earth space that also fits into the wider macro technology trends as well. So, it's not a small asset class by any means, but actually the mechanisms for investing into those and the similarities in the way those markets currently operate, being primarily OTC, lacking liquidity, sort of high minimum entry sizes, is something that we think we can take our blueprint of what we've delivered in uranium and uranium.io to those other asset classes as well.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. And I mean, you touched on it a minute ago there, and like when you talk through it, it's obviously not an easy problem to solve, right? There's a whole host of regulatory and compliance issues involved in this, and you have to overcome a lot of challenges in bringing something like this to market in the first place. Can you just give us a sense of like what that process has looked like? What have some of the major challenges or hurdles in launching uranium.io been?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Look, I had the fun and fortunate job of having sort of 18 months to 2 years of strong work from Arthur, Curzon, Lodewijk, general counsel, sort of fitting all the pieces together. And you touched on some of that complexity. So the primary challenge is finding the right partners and ensuring that we can work with all of these partners in the right way to manage the processes, because we're going from what is not an unfair statement to say is quite an archaic market, can be predominantly paper-based or maybe even DocuSign, which is a big advance, as Crispin said, but very much bilateral. The market itself settles anywhere on an expedited basis in 3 to 5 days. Typical settlement is 2 weeks. And so when you're going from a process perspective, when you're going from that market and then making it accessible 24/7 and globally, ensuring you've got the right partners and managing all of those partners to be in sync and aligned with each other actually takes quite a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of stakeholder management. So that's absolutely one of the first things that we spent a lot of time doing and diligencing and finding all of those partners. There's two other bits that I would highlight in terms of challenges. The other bit is the regulatory piece, right? And being very articulate and clear about the nature of the regulatory status of what we've done with uranium.io. So just to recap, spot commodity trading in and of itself is not a regulated activity in most jurisdictions. And so we've spent a lot of time working with our legal team, working with Archax's legal team working with external counsel to really ascertain where this fits. And the nature of the legal structure that we've got means that we're using kind of the English common law trust framework and blockchain technology to manage this, which means that it's still very much in the spot commodity trading remit. It's just a much more efficient and effective market. And so the beauty of that common law trust framework is that outside of blockchain and outside of technology and even outside of commodities, one can assign their equitable interest in a trust, in a common law trust, to another person with a written express intent and a signature. Most on this webinar we're going to be familiar with, that's a perfect use case for the blockchain. So I transfer my tokens to you, I've given that written instruction, and you sign that and I sign that. We've got the mechanism for transferring within that common law trust. So again, all credits due to the legal teams in that regard that's enabled us to operate in that piece. But in terms of hurdles and challenges that we are overcoming, explaining that to different market participants has been absolutely key. And that explanation and educational piece, because it hasn't been an asset that people have been able to access before, that educational piece is sort of the third barrier of educating people, not just why it's a great asset and why they should be looking to invest in it, but also to all the different relevant audiences that we want to interact with, right? And balancing that messaging between, because it is very relevant for a Web3 audience, as Arthur articulated, but also relevant to getting users who we'd consider to be Web 2 or Web 2.5 users interested as well. It shares a lot of the similar profiles of other commodities that day traders or pro-tail investors may want to look at. So they're the kind of three areas I would say are this sort of been the biggest hurdles that we've managed to overcome, is sort of working with all our partners, making sure they're all lined up, managing the regulatory piece, not least in relation to the platform, and making it easy as possible, and ensuring then that we can get the right educational content and messaging out to be fit for purpose for the different audiences that this product's relevant for.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much, Ben. It's incredible, I think, when you're talking about, an industry and a market that maybe is ripe for innovation and change. And a lot of those folks, I guess, in the traditional side of things aren't going to be familiar with blockchain technology at all. Crispin, I'd love your take on, like, when you're having a conversation with somebody about a platform like this, about Uranium.io specifically, is there an education barrier there that you're kind of coming up against? And what, are they seeing the innovation that's at play here?
I think it's a very good question, Eoin, and I think it depends on the type of investor, right? Like, I think more traditional investors will maybe say, hey, what's the underlying technology here? But more kind of innovative investors, it's not an impediment to them. I think what's important to them is that, as Ben said, like around the proof of ownership, that they feel comfortable with that, and the common trust law. Once they're comfortable with that, then it's fine. No, it's absolutely fine, and the benefits outweigh any potential concerns about that, right? Because when they see this, that they can use this for transacting quickly, efficiently, without the kind of a counterparty risk, like if they have to wait for physical settlement or cash settlement, that's all taken away from them. So yeah, the benefits outweigh any potential downside.
Brilliant. And I think, having been in the industry for many years, you're really well placed to talk to the highly regulated nature of uranium as an asset. I think people think you're giving access to uranium to everybody. Can you give people a sense
of course,
of how highly regulated this asset is?
So uranium, it's a part of the fuel cycle that goes into a nuclear power plant. So what we're investing, when we talk about investing in spot uranium, we're talking about U3O8, or what we call yellow cake. So that has to be converted and then enriched to turn it into fuel pellets to go into a nuclear power plant. In the form of U3O8 or yellow cake, it's stored in barrels in facilities in Canada and around the world. So it's not radioactive at all. And in fact, when after the enrichment process to go into the nuclear power plant, it's only lightly enriched up to like 3 to 5%. So it's perfectly safe for humans to to be close to it.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that's kind of the fuel.
You don't want to breeze too much of it.
Yeah, that's the fuel cycle. So yeah, when we talk about spot commodity trading, we're talking about the U308 and buying and selling of that, because what happens is fuel buyers, they're buying on behalf of a nuclear power plant. They buy the spot commodity, the yellow cake, and then they buy conversion and enrichment facilities to turn it into the fuel rods to go into their nuclear power plants.
Brilliant. So yeah. Absolutely essential as asset in the kind of energy transition in the long run, especially for AI, as we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's absolutely two aspects to that. Is number one is yellow cake is the same yellow cake around the world. When it's mined and it's milled, it's turned into yellow cake, and that's a common standard around the world. That's why uranium was a good asset or commodity to start off with tokenization, because if we buy it in Namibia, if we buy in Kazakhstan, if we buy it in Canada, it's the same physical property. Unlike something like gold, where you can have different standards, right? Like kind of yellow cake is yellow cake. So yeah, once we've got that, then it goes through this conversion facility. Like any commodity, like the uranium market is based upon supply and demand. So another important thing to understand about the industry is on the demand side. So like who are the main buyers of uranium? They're what we call fuel buyers. They're buying on behalf of a nuclear power plant. Two important aspects to that is number one is the cost of the uranium as a part of the overall cost of the nuclear power plant is very small on a percentage basis compared with something like a coal-fired plant. So what that means in terms of price is it doesn't matter what the price is, the fuel buyers have to buy it for their nuclear power plants. So there's kind of this inelasticity in the price. Number two is there is no substitute for that nuclear power plant. They have to buy uranium. They can't use something else. So what these two things mean is that we can forecast very precisely what the demand is for uranium, because we know kind of the current fleet of nuclear reactors. We know the ones that are being restarted as kind of geopolitical tensions go away, places like Japan and other countries, and we can anticipate the demand for the new builds. So places like China, Korea, they're building new power plants. So we can very precisely map out like what the demand for uranium is over the next 15 to 20 years.
That's fascinating.
That's very important to know when you're trying to price a commodity. So on the supply side, it's a little bit more tricky on the supply side, because you've got mining restarts. It's quite hard to forecast on the supply side, because there are risks of mines that sometimes they flood. Sometimes their production is held up by lack of sulfuric acid, for example. So anyway, so we've got this commodity that has very precise demand, and we kind of we can know approximately what the supply is. So that's a good commodity to be investing in, because on the demand side very cleanly.
Yeah, I mean, possibly not something that can be said for a lot of other tokenized assets in the blockchain space as well.
Absolutely,
yeah, that guarantee of demand and supply as well.
No, absolutely. So when we think about this, we think about like the kind of annual demand. We kind of an idea of like this kind of what we call this 2 billion pounds, physical pounds of uranium that's going to be required in the next 15 years for the fleet of nuclear reactors that are being built, they're in operation, being built and restarted. So then we kind of calculate what a replacement rate is. So just to keep the current reactors going, we can figure out what this replacement rate is. So part of the industry is looking at what that replacement rate is versus what is being supplied. And what's very clear is there's a big deficit to that. So what's coming out of the ground and being made available as a spot commodity is not even filling like the replacement rate for nuclear power plants today. So when you have a situation like that, it's a good situation for price appreciation of that commodity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Crispin. I
Yeah,
think
no
with
problem.
all of that in mind, Arthur, we've talked a couple of times about this concept of like real world assets, or real world assets, as it were, like the heavyweights, right? Like uranium being one of them. So those assets for which, like Crispin has said, there's almost guaranteed demand in the future, like they're an essential asset as such. I think, why then, if this is such a no-brainer in a way, why has nobody tried this before? Why is uranium.io the first time this has been done?
I think some people have tried it. I don't think they did it right. So there was this project that tried to do, I think, something like backed by not physical uranium, but physical uranium that was going to be extracted from a mine. And then when things got hard, they turned into an NFT project. And I think they're trying to restart something. But yeah, it's difficult. Like Ben makes it sound very simple, but it took a lot of work to get to where we are in terms of setup, and doing it right, finding the right partners, finding the right legal framework. That takes a lot of thinking. The other thing is sometimes you have overlooked opportunities. I think so many people in crypto, for example, are focused on chasing the same things that they're not paying attention to other opportunities.
Yeah, totally. And I guess in addition to finding the right partners and navigating the compliance and regulatory environment as well, you also have the tech of it all, right? So I think let's talk a little bit about that. Uranium.io runs on Etherlink, which is an EVM compatible L2. Do you want to give us a sense of how the blockchain infrastructure actually ensures like security, transparency, and efficiency when it comes to trading something like uranium?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting about Uranium.io as a tokenization project is that you'll see a lot of tokenization projects out there where essentially what you have is a glorified transfer agent, right? So you'll have like some entity, and then everyone just signs up with that one entity. And whenever they want to do a trade or anything like that, they just go to that one centralized entity, and then sure, the entity will sometimes put a hash on the blockchain or whatever. And that's not real, and it doesn't really leverage the technology for what it's good for. This is in stark contrast with Uranium.io, where you can hold the tokens directly into your wallet, and in fact, you can buy the you can buy the token in a variety of places, including RTX, but also including in a smart contract that runs on Etherlink. So you can directly leverage the blockchain ability to deploy such contracts. I hope that in the future we'll see something more than that. You'll be able to borrow, you'll be able to do different things. We have to think through like the legal frameworks to do this well. But we've seen so many innovation, technical innovation in the space of DeFi, and none of it has really like served very, very practical purposes in the real world. And like bringing this into the real world, I think is really interesting. Etherlink itself, it's EVM compatible, so EVM is very popular standard nowadays, but it runs on top of Tezos, so it has the underlying security of Tezos with an EVM flavor, which may be more familiar to a lot of integrators out there. It's state of the art. It runs with sub-second blocks. So you have very, very fast confirmation of your transactions. No need to wait hours for it. It's also extremely cheap. No need to pay tens of dollars for a single transaction, which is important if you want to democratize access and have people buy uranium in any size.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no point in trying to pay enormous gas fees on ounces of uranium.
Yeah,
I suppose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then Ben touched on it already as well. When we talked about maybe this as an ideal foundation for future rare earths and rare earth minerals and things like that. Anything in particular that you're excited to explore in the longer term?
Yeah, I think there's all of the other commodities which are, I would say, none of them are as ideally suited as uranium, but all of them are interesting. So now that we have a great framework doing all the commodities, I think is very interesting. But we also want to make sure that Uranium.io is also very well known, and that many people are onboarded before diverting more efforts into other commodities.
Absolutely, yeah. But an interesting tidbit there, so one to watch for people. Ben, I think, as you know all too well, I suppose, like the story didn't end in December when the platform launched. It's been a kind of a cycle of enhancements and improvements to the site and the user experience and the flow and all that stuff. Do you want to touch on some of the work that's been done over the last few months to kind of continue improving the experience for users?
Sure, of course. So look, I think one of the big things, we were very keen to, as any good company, company building a product should be, is we're very keen to ship fast, and we shipped the first version of the product in December, and that all worked, and it was great. But I think what we, as you rightly point out, wanted to do was make sure that we were continuing, and I alluded to this before, right, balancing sort of as near seamless experience as possible with ensuring that regulatory compliance. So in terms of continued evolution of that product, you will have seen, at least I hope many of you will have seen, and if you haven't, then here's a good update for you, is that we actually have spent a lot of time since we launched thinking about how we streamline our onboarding process. And I'm pleased to say that we launched that a couple of weeks ago. So, it really is as simple as going on to uranium.io, clicking buy, and then entering your email address and wallet address. If you don't have a wallet, you can set up a wallet using one of our partners, and then you can buy as much uranium as you would like from there. What's really important here is we have kind of flipped the script a little bit and made sure that what we do in the background is get even more enhanced analytics and on using on-chain analytics to ensure that we're doing all of the relevant screening when somebody makes a transaction as we need to, and then doing any escalation within that. So, that could be one of a few things. Could be we don't need to take any further action, but we add them to our ongoing monitoring program. It may be that we use our third-party provider to do enhanced due diligence or KYC review, and you could be asked for KYC. Or it may be that actually this is something that from a risk perspective is just the wallet has got too much risk, and we decide that actually we need to block that wallet address. So, it's not that we're kind of removing and making this completely permissionless, given the nature of the asset as we talked about. That's not something we can do or we believe should be doing. But what we have done is we feel streamlined that onboarding process to make it as simple as possible to kind of buy U308. And certainly, in terms of the numbers that we look at, we've seen a big uptick since we've made this upgrade, which is great. In terms of other things that we're doing that link to this and link to the wider Etherlink ecosystem, you will have hopefully, I hope, seen the announcements around Apple Farm, and Apple Farm going live this week. Uranium.io will be part of that program. So not only do you get the benefit of having access to a great asset in U308, but also you'll be rewarded for that as well as part of Apple Farm going forwards, and the first season within Apple Farm. So that's great. And we continue to work on that messaging and sort of finessing and tweaking the messaging for different audiences. So not only are we in big crypto and Web3 newsletters, we're also getting placement in traditional commodities websites and newsletters and articles to ensure that we're hitting that audience too. And we're naturally recognizing where the market is right now, trying to also engage with some of the large centralized exchanges to drive further liquidity and volume through the product, because that benefits everyone, right? Not just token holders, but also those primary actors in the value chain that need access to an accurate price and a liquid market. We think it's going to have longer term benefits there as well. So, it's much of the same, just at increased intensity, and we're going to be at very, all the large events. So if you want more information, I'm sure you can talk to us there as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, a lot of great features being added to the site and the DApp every day, really, and I think lots more to come. Obviously, we don't want to give the game away too much because a lot of that will make it through to the news cycle, hopefully. But yeah, people should definitely keep track, and as you say, follow us on the events circuit and also on socials as well. Brilliant. Crispin, I'd love to zoom out a little bit again and just come back to you in terms of,
Sure.
You're obviously an advisor to a lot of companies about, how they can kind of leverage DLT and blockchain technologies and sort of like tap into this space in general. On the more sort of macro level, are you seeing like increased interest in these technologies among the clients that you're working with, and specifically in the commodity space, but even beyond?
Yeah, definitely, Eoin. I guess what I see is it's not just what I see uranium.io. It's a marketplace. We talk a lot about kind of investors coming in here to buy and sell. But what's interesting to note is like the people, all the constituents who are involved with the uranium, like fuel cycle, what are they looking for? They're looking to lower transaction costs. They're looking for more accurate pricing, price discovery, and they're looking for transparency. So things obviously like, Uranium and IO powered by DLT enables that, right? So that, that's a very important point. So what I see going forward is the marketplace really being used by all the constituents, right? Like fuel buyers, and then, mining companies, they want to sell their uranium. They're getting out of the ground and they want to sell it. How would they do that traditionally? They would go and sell it on the spot market, or they negotiate an offtake agreement with a broker to take that commodity and sell it onto the spot market or into the term market. So, what are we enabling here? We're enabling a lower cost of doing that and a more transparent way of doing that at pricing that that is negotiated, and it's a kind of a live price rather than like a private price. So yeah, kind of all these technologies are coming in and really revolutionizing the whole space, not just the investment space. So I see that uranium is the first one, but lithium is a very similar commodity the way it trades. So I can see opportunities there, and cobalt.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
I think so. All these kind of players who need a more accurate market. As I mentioned earlier, like in the way uranium trades, there's a spot market and there's a term market. There's no kind of highly used futures price for the product, which is very unusual for a commodity that there's not that, right? So what we're enabling here is a very active liquid spot price. And then once we've got that, then we'll be able to offer futures and different financial instruments, whether it's kind of, with DeFi or other ways to offer that. But kind of that's what I personally quite excited about, right? To provide that kind of full suite of the spot market, then some derivatives markets also.
Yeah, absolutely. You really see this melding of the DeFi and TradFi cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I suppose I'd love to open the floor as well. Like obviously when you launch a product like this and you give people access to an asset like uranium, there'll always be naysayers who are like, oh, is it a positive thing to give mainstream access to an essential like asset that's necessary for the energy transition and for the future of AI and development? How do you counter that point? What do you say to people who are, opposed to things like this?
Well, there's a couple of things that it's important to understand, right? Like when you buy the token, you can't take physical delivery of the product, right? It's unless like a retail investor, maybe he's going to put some money in and take a small investment. For institutions can come in if they want to, they can buy sufficient tokens, and then once they've gone through the regulation check, which basically Curzon will be a part of to make sure they have the right converter account, that they're regulated, they actually could take physical delivery of the uranium. So we would kind of burn their tokens and they could take, physical settlement. But kind of most investors will not want to do that. They just want to own it from an investment point of view.
I've been waiting for my uranium to arrive.
It's also important to understand, the kind of regulations are very tight around uranium, where it can be physically stored. In the Western world, there's 3 storage facilities around the world, one in the US, one in Canada, and one in France. So it has to be physically stored there, and it's obviously tightly controlled. And then there's audit reports, and we get a regular report of like what is stored, what is physically stored in those facilities. So there's very accurate reporting and auditing of what's there as well.
Yeah. So all of this giving people a real indication of like how complex the regulatory space is and the elegance of the solution that allows actually people to access the asset, and even if they have the required licenses, like take delivery.
Absolutely. So like the change in ownership traditionally is quite onerous, right? Like it's expensive, and it can take a kind of a fast change of ownership is like 5 business days. What we're offering is that instantaneous change in ownership with a unique legal structure.
That's incredible. Yeah, amazing. Ben, do you have anything to add to that in terms of like why you're excited for what's coming up in the next 6 months for Uranium.io and some of the other things we're working on internally?
Yeah, look, I remain super excited about everything that we're doing, right? But naturally, I'm going to say that as the product lead. But I do think that, you know, the vision here is that, to answer directly your question, is that we become the venue for trading uranium, both from whatever participant. Because actually, you know, I don't think anyone's ever said, oh, having better price discovery and more liquidity is a bad thing for any market. And in fact, the recognition that this is a critical building block and foundation for, you know, energy security and for powering what I think most people would accept is a pretty great technology in AI, albeit, you know, there's debate to be had there. But AI is coming and it needs to be powered, and energy demands are ever increasing. So actually, the more transparent and the more liquid that market can be, the better the outcomes can be from both a financial and what, you know, in the commodities industry, speculator perspective, but also from a primary user risk management perspective as well, that ensures that that whole market operates more efficiently. So I think that's what I'm excited about, is just getting out there, hitting the pavement, getting in front of these institutional investors, you know, driving activity, ensuring that we're not kind of losing sight of the benefits of Uranium.io for the individual investor, and ensuring that we create the right kind of products, as Crispin alluded to, around that to further encourage that activity. But, you know, I want to see Uranium.io and be the place where uranium is traded kind of for everyone, and that's kind of what the vision is, and we're well on our way to doing that. And, you know, or we just need to get to that critical mass, and that's sort of where we're heading right now.
Yeah, I suppose the fun part of being ahead of the game slightly is that there's a little bit of education and a little bit of hitting the pavement, as you say, to do. So yeah, all that ahead of us for sure. And Arthur, I suppose with that in mind, like, you know, 2 years, the culmination of like 2 years of work, you know, it must feel like a real milestone moment for yourself. Obviously, it's the launch of a really, you know, I think anybody listening in can really sort of grasp the innovation at play here and see that like this could only really have been accomplished by using blockchain technology, basing this on Tezos technology. Do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, how this fits into your broader vision for where Tezos is going as an ecosystem? You know, we've talked a little bit about Tezos X. It would be great to kind of get your perspective on how what part of the jigsaw puzzle this is.
You know, I think if there's any brand identity to Tezos, it would be doing things for real. We live in a space where a lot of blockchains do things for fake. You know, they report fake transaction numbers. They tout, you know, fake use cases, fake narratives, all of that. And we've always done things for real. And, you know, I think to this end, it makes sense to actually go into markets that have legs, where there's an actual genuine need, where the technology can actually make a difference. And as part of that, I think there's a really interesting push to be made in real-world assets and DeFi. It's more than a buzzword. There's really is there. I feel like finance needs to finance something, and there is something to finance here.
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting point. I think you touched on it recently in an interview you did. The fact that this kind of circular economy is a little bit of a threat to the crypto space. And do you want to just explore that in a little bit more detail for people who aren't familiar with the concept of, you know, finance actually needed to finance something?
Yeah. So, you know, the point of finance is like you have a bunch of people and they want to do undertakings. You know, they don't want to just be hunter-gatherers. Maybe they want to build a farm, or, you know, they want to do all these different things. And the problem is like you need capital to do that. And so you have, on the one hand, people who are savers and who have accumulated capital, and you have someone who needs capital to build an entrepreneurial project and do things with it. Like that's, you know, it's a very, very high level view of what is finance and what does finance do. And the idea of finance is basically it's a form of engineering where the risk is being spread to different parties, so that the parties who are the most in the best space to share a specific type of risk gets to have this type of risk. So, you know, henceforth, lending and, you know, joint stock ventures and all of these different things. But the point of finance is that there's an entrepreneurial activity behind it that you want to finance. what is the entrepreneurial activities that DeFi currently, as it exists, is funding. It's just funding more DeFi. And so, DeFi cannot use the DeFi to justify itself, right? There needs to be some things that you're funding. Now, to some extent, if there is a use case for cryptocurrencies, which is store of value. And so if you want people to be able to borrow against the store of value, that's one use case of DeFi, but that's limiting. And clearly, the DeFi industry is much larger than, the mere demand that there is for borrowing. So a lot of DeFi industry is focused on trading other DeFi tokens. That's circular, right? Another way to look at it is that if DeFi were a country, what are its exports? Or if blockchains, the crypto ecosystem was a country, what are its exports? Like, sure, you'll have internal things, like, oh, I sell services to that person, I sell services to that person, but like, what do you produce at the end of the day? And making uranium liquid markets more liquid, more accessible, more transparent, that's an export. That's an export.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't come more real than that. There I was thinking my quantum dog laser token was going to be, we're all the rage in the next few years, but I think uranium
well,
is better.
The terrible thing about, the terrible thing from my perspective about doing things with uranium is that, it's going to work or it's going to fail. The best thing to do in crypto space is to latch on a narrative that's not going to be proven right. You do a crypto token for fusion and you can sell that for 20 years by saying like, oh, well, when fusion come around, obviously all the reactors are going to need this token. So here it's real.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Anything to add to that, Crispin?
I think just to add to that, yeah, it kind of brought up in my mind like the kind of what we call the bifurcation that's happening in the uranium space right now globally. There's a lot of geopolitics going on around, the US kind of after rare earth and uranium assets in different countries. Same happening in China. They're trying to capture the sources in Africa, and Russian. They're trying to kind of bring in Kazatomprom, which is the world's largest uranium mine. So kind of on that note, this kind of this bifurcation of the industry. And in fact, that brings up another very useful thing that we can do with blockchain is that kind of tracing where the origin of the uranium, right? So what we find in kind of broking uranium now is that if we have a Western facility, then they'll say, okay, we want to source the uranium from we don't want to get it from certain jurisdictions. We want to have it from these other jurisdictions. So that's kind of an important point. And things like blockchain and the kind of the origin and the mutability is very useful technology to kind of keep track of that.
Yeah, really underscoring that transparency that it brings and the kind of trustworthiness of the sourcing. Yeah. So no, it's interesting, like in terms of the pricing as well, like these kind of dynamics happening because of potential tariffs on uranium. The actual price of uranium right now is higher in the US than it is outside the US. So it's actually $2 high. Like the price outside of the US is like 65 US a pound. In the US, it's $2 higher. So there's kind of a little bit of like the pricing bifurcation as well going on. It's happening in other commodities like gold. Companies or institutions are shipping gold into the US because of the potential tariffs. But anyway, kind of interesting dynamics, and that's why things like more dynamic pricing, more liquidity, and more introspection and the transparency around the market is so important. Yeah, super interesting. I think we just lost half our viewership to go take advantage of that arbitrage opportunity identified. But yeah, it's an interesting one and a great example of the kind of inefficiencies sometimes that pervade the traditional trading markets. Okay, I think we're kind of approaching time, so I just want to hand it out to you all. If there's anything you wanted to chat about that I have not asked you about, any questions for one another for that matter. You've all been working closely on this for quite some time at this point, so happy to kind of leave the final concluding thoughts to yourselves, and then we can wrap things up.
I had no questions for everyone else. I just say, like, generally, like, there's a lot of good reading on online and in different places. If you really want to kind of be educated about the sector, because there has been a lot of negativity around the nuclear sector that has gone away, kind of a geopolitical negativity. But there's a lot of good research, a lot of good papers around the industry, and it's really this idea of baseload power, right? I mean, I'm a big believer in renewable power. Of course, we should capture energy from wind and from solar. But there's no question, like this idea of baseload power, and there's only two ways to generate baseload power: nuclear or burning coal or gas, right? And I'm obviously a big believer in nuclear, because in operation it's absolutely carbon free. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Crispin.
Yeah.
Great point. Brilliant. Well, I think it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Arthur, Crispin, and Ben. It's been a pleasure. To the community, thank you all for joining us as well. This is why we run these town halls. It's great to have your involvement. Please do continue the conversation in the comment sections and on Telegram, Discord, etc. And yeah, tune in, keep track of the socials, and we'll be announcing the next town hall very soon. So thanks for joining us, everyone. I think we can leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.